Perfect. And then I'm going to go ahead and start the webinar. But we'll wait maybe like 2 minutes for people to join.
Okay, that
Okay,
works for me.
perfect. Okay. Hi, welcome everybody. We're going to wait about 2 minutes for everyone to join. We're excited for you all to be here though. Hope you all had a great weekend. Hi everyone, welcome. We're going to give it about 1 more minute for everyone to join and then we're going to get started. Alrighty everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, please save them for the end and put them in the Q&A. And we will try our best to answer them later on. Welcome to Internships 101, Finding and Applying for Internships. My name is Liz. I am the Internship Programs Advisor.
And hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm a senior career advisor on the career engagement team.
Thanks, Sarah. And if you could quickly check in with our QR code, I'll kind of give you all a minute. You should be able to scan it on your screen. If not, we can also pull your name later. Alrighty, and then I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next screen. Alrighty, so for today's agenda, we're going to be going over understanding your goals, what and where to research, building a list. So, what does that mean? What do you put on it? Finding internships, preparing application materials. Very briefly, we'll go over resumes, and then, preparing for interviews, securing the internship, and then career center resources.
Okay. So we wanted to start with the career development process. This is something that our team came up with so that you know where you are in your own career journeys. So we have step 1 to step 4. And as you can see, your step 1 is to really know yourself. You want to understand your interests, and you also want to identify your skills, strengths, and values so that you can move on to step 2 and explore options intentionally. So as you can see here, we have research majors and careers, investigate industries, connect with professionals, identify mentors. This really, there's a lot of steps within that step 2, but it should be a really fun season in which you are talking to a bunch of people, whether they're in your industry or on campus, to understand how you want to plan and prepare. So in that stage, you want to develop your professional skills, build your job search toolkit, and create an action plan. And so we'll stay mostly in step 3 as we're talking today. And then, of course, step 4, you want to take action, actually apply for internships and jobs, gain relevant experience, and grow your network. So hopefully after this session or this webinar, you'll feel confident enough to pursue step 4. But I'm assuming a lot of you are in step 3 right now, or even step 2. So if you have any questions about these stages, feel free to ask them away in the Q&A. And I see that someone asked if this will be recorded. So yes, it will be recorded and shared with all of the attendees.
Thanks, Sarah. Alrighty, so The first step in securing an internship is understanding your goals, meaning, are you trying to find an internship, fellowship, right? Understanding your own skill set and how that applies to the internship you're looking for. So take a moment to think about like your interests, your skills, think about the industry you want to get into, right? Consider how what you're learning in your graduate classes would be applied to the internships. Um, and also think about like what you're hoping to gain. So for example, are you hoping to gain a certain skill set? Are you hoping to enter a certain industry, get exposure to certain work processes, right? Or are you just trying to grow your professional network, right? Think about what you're trying to gain from this internship, what your end goal is with it, to help inform your search in this internship. And then we recommend doing your research. Sarah, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. So first things first, for research, you want to be mindful of recruiting deadlines, which is going to vary by industry, and research the job market to understand current trends and opportunities. So just as a reminder, there isn't one recruiting season. Timelines depend on the industry, the role type, so internships versus full-time, and then whether hiring is structured. So campus pipelines, depending on the organization. So if you want to further discuss this, you can always make an appointment with our center, but Liz is going to show you a breakdown of timelines shortly. And then also keep in mind that some industries hire far in advance, sometimes up to a year in advance. So you want to do your research on that. And so I guess basically what I'm trying to say is that your strategy should be industry specific. You want to build a calendar per target, per industry, per role and make like a deadline tracker for yourself. Company role, opening date, deadline, interview windows, and things like that. And you can find this out on company career pages and set up alerts on your own. And then we also want you to understand the job market, so the trends, where the demand is growing. So you want to understand the job market because you want to align your skills to where the demand is heading. So a few ways that you can do your research for that is to go on the World Economic Forum, Futures of Job Report and Economic Reports, and USC Library Guides. And so the World Economics Forum, it gives you a whole bunch of different perspectives over like 1,000 global employers representing like 4 million workers. It's going to give you a workforce and how it's changing between even 2025 to 2030. So I'd highly recommend Googling that and reading the different PDFs there. And a couple of things that you can keep in mind is AI, right? How is AI changing the workforce? How is that shifting the skills needed within your market or industry? And then we, of course, have the USC Library Guide, which is free for all students. And so on the library guide, I put a screenshot here. You're going to pick an industry or pick a subject, and it's going to give you a whole bunch of information, companies, forecasts, competitors, job information, and things like that. So it's really a database that you would need to sit down and go through. And if you ever have trouble really understanding all the different steps here with research, then again, you can always make an appointment with us and be happy to walk you through it. Okay, Liz?
Alrighty, and now speaking on what to research. So Sarah kind of spoke briefly about, where to get started on your research within USC resources. But when you want to think about what you're researching, think about company culture, the size of the company, their values. So for example, working at an organization with like 50 people is going to look very differently than working at an organization with 5,000 people, right? So do your research on like how big the organization is, what the culture is like, and we'll briefly kind of go over some other resources where you can do that research. And then you also want to carefully read like internship descriptions to understand like what they're looking for, the skill set, the qualifications, also so you can apply that into your own resume and cover letter, which we'll get into later. And then a pro tip we have for you all is to save the job description for later. We'll get into that when we talk about internships, but save a PDF, copy and paste it somewhere for your own reference. But it does help to save the internship description for later on. If you do get an invitation to interview, you can use the job description to help you prepare for the interview. Okay, And then speaking more on specifically the timelines you should be researching. So the timeline for every industry is a little bit different. So for example, if you're looking to get into consulting, they start recruiting in the spring, so for the following year. So for example, this March, April, they're recruiting for summer of 2027. So it's more than a year in advance where they start recruiting for their internships in consulting and finance. But if you're looking to be more in, let's say, government or nonprofits, for example, you can actually find an internship with them the spring before the summer that you're applying for. So right now would be a good time to start looking for internships if you're really interested in government for summer of 2026. So these timelines vary a lot by industry, so it's important to do your own research on what that timeline looks like for your industry. Okay. And then building a list. So I spoke about this briefly earlier when I touched on the agenda, but when you are looking for internships, I recommend building a literal list of organizations that you're interested in. This is going to be part of your research in understanding the organizations for your industry. So when you're building a list, this is kind of the format I recommend using. So having the list of literally the organization, when the application opens, when the application is due. I recommend having the link to apply, maybe a column for whether or not you've submitted it, and any kind of notes you have. In the notes, I would recommend having maybe what you still need to do with your resume, or if you have any sort of contact within the organization. I would recommend at least 20 to 30, using maybe Handshake or LinkedIn, and possibly identifying, having an open mind about the organizations. Okay. Sarah, can you touch on this very quickly?
Sure. And so finding internships, these are some ways in which you can identify internships and also apply for internships on campus or in relation to the connections that SC has. So Handshake is our one-stop shop for everything related to jobs on campus, off campus, internships, on campus, off campus, as well as career resources. And of course, it's how you registered for this event. So I'm not going to go in too much into Handshake, but please utilize that as much as possible and even have access to that as an alum. So it's going to be, again, your one-stop shop for job search. Now, we also have career fairs. We have career fairs every semester. We have spring career fairs. We have fall career fairs. I'll let Liz talk about the Internship Expo shortly, and the Culture and Community Recruitment event, as well as school-specific career fairs, right? Whether you're in Viterbi, Marshall, Annenberg, you really should go and attend and speak to the recruiters, showcasing your resume and your experiences. And we also have career fair prep workshops, both recorded and live, in which you can practice your elevator pitch. So you really want to be prepared prior to going to these events. And also, briefly touching on the research earlier in the slides, don't only research company timelines, but research the actual positions. So when you're talking to these recruiters, you're not asking them, what kind of positions are you hiring for? But rather, you're asking more intentional questions about their company culture, about the skills, and really selling yourself. We have a ton of workshops. I mean, Career Fest, we have like 70 plus workshops this week. But throughout the school year, we're going to continue to post on Handshake if they're not there already. So take advantage of the resume cover letter workshops. Go listen to our salary negotiation workshops. And we even have like peer-to-peer networking sessions, right? And so plug them into your calendar. And the important piece is to be consistent, right? Um, and then I'll let Liz take over for industry insights here if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So one of the questions I get pretty often is like, is it worth it to go to career fairs or, these engagement opportunities? And yes, it is. So recruiters actually do remember you showing up and engaging with them. You want to make sure like you're engaging with them across these different opportunities. So at the career fairs, right? And like Sarah said, doing your research on them. I lead the Inside Scoop series, where employers come and do panels on touching on different like career topics. So for example, they're having a career fair tips one this week, and we're having an interviewing one in a few weeks. But that would be another opportunity where, let's say you attend it, and then later you meet this recruiter. You could say, "Hey, I remember you talking about career fair tips. It really helped me at the career fair." And so you're kind of creating this, going beyond this engagement and reaching out and engaging with them through these different opportunities. And then again, just kind of finding different opportunities to engage with not only recruiters but alum as well. So the industry insiders, where we have both recruiters and alum coming to speak about their industry. So this is another form of research where you can explore the industry by hearing directly from people in the industry. So you can take a look at that on our website, where we have the upcoming list of panels for the insiders. And again, Trojan Talks is where we have the employers coming to engage with us across different forms. So, for example, sometimes they'll do an information session, sometimes it's a networking mixer. So, again, just finding what those opportunities are and seeing where you can fit that into your schedule to engage with recruiters or engage with the alums or have these sort of coffee chats with people that we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides.
So we also wanted to emphasize a couple resources for PhDs specifically. Of course, graduate students have access to it as well, so you can always look at it. But for those of you in the room who are doctoral students, we have something called the Versatile PhD. It's a free online community career exploration platform, and it helps doctoral students and postdocs identify career paths beyond academia. So you can have access to different career clusters based on your interests and skills. You also can look at different job boards and networking communities. And this is really going to be a great asset for you to explore multiple sectors. And then that kind of ties into intersect job simulations. So what this is a career planning and exploration platform. And it helps users assess interests and values and find different career paths. And so there's assessments, there's dashboards, there's different recommended career paths based on your strengths. So after you take the assessment, you'll be able to see the results. And it kind of provides a structured way for PhDs to match interest with real careers. And you can go in and actually like watch these videos and these tutorials, and it's basically a self-explanatory job simulation. So you get to really understand what it's like to be a data analyst or what it's like to work in as a consultant or whatnot. And so go into this website, and there's also webinars that you can see recorded from years ago. And there's people who are on those webinars that you can also contact. We also have something called Biospace, and this is a life sciences job and industry resource site. And so it connects job seekers to opportunities in biotech, pharma, and healthcare. So you're going to see industry jobs, you're going to see company profiles and news, you're also going to see career resources and events. It's really great for those of you who are targeting science careers, obviously outside of academia. It's a great resource that I've shared with some students, even post the PhD conference. Just as a quick side note, the PhD conference recordings are on our page. If you just type in a PhD conference on our Career Center website, you'll be able to find that. And so I would also watch those recordings too, because we go over all of this. Um, and we have a ton of alumni and panelists who came to speak about their experiences. And we also have their bios and headshots there's a link for that too, so you can always reach out afterwards. Now, going back to the slide, we have my IDP Science Careers, and this is kind of like your individual development plan, and it's a career planning tool for scientists. So again, for those of you who are in science, it's going to help you assess your skills, interest, and they also have a self-assessment category, and it helps you match up to like 20 plus-ish science careers, and from there you can really condense it down. We're going to talk about this soon, but we highly recommend you do informational interviews and really connect with alumni and professionals to understand exactly what types of careers you want to head into if you're still unsure. But this is a great start, my IDP. And it's also great for goal setting. You can create goals on the platform, and then it's going to help you keep track and make sure that you are kept accountable. And then pathways2science.org. This is also a resource for STEM education and careers, and it kind of supports students from all levels, actually. So undergrad, grad, postdoc. And they have funding databases. So if you're looking for fellowships and scholarships, again, if you're also looking for different career pathways, it's going to give you that info. And they also have some mentoring and training resources that I would recommend you check out. And then finally, Imagine PhD. This is probably our most popular tool. It's a research-based career exploration planning tool for humanities and social sciences. So this is going to help you visualize what careers in that industry looks like. This also has a whole bunch of career clusters. You're going to find PDFs, you're going to find links. It's really like I would say a bunch of files that you can look on your own to figure out what kind of gaps you have within your skill sets based on where you want to be in the future. And it also lists out different job requirements, job descriptions. And again, it's designed specifically for non-STEM PhDs. So I would highly recommend I Imagine PhD for those of you who are unsure where to begin, or even if you are sure of what industry you want to go into, it really breaks it down for you. So please utilize all of these resources. And then we also have something called fellowships. So as a PhD student, you have access to this, as you can see here, and also master's and postdoctoral students as well. But all applicants who are admitted into a qualified USC PhD program are automatically considered for incoming fellowships. I'm not sure if there's a way to drop links here, Liz, in the chat. But if we're not able to do that, I will go ahead and send all the links that I'm talking about, including specific fellowship and scholarship databases for you. But please take advantage of this. If you go on to the next slide, I break down the difference between internships and fellowships. So internships is a short-term work experience to gain entry-level experience, industry or field of your choice. And then fellowships is typically focused on your professional development and academic research. And this is typically for those as a graduate and postgraduate level. And then internships is recommended for students seeking jobs during and after college and sometimes part-time, part of a degree or training program requirement. But fellowships, it usually requires applicants to propose a project or study to complete during the fellowship period. So it's slightly different. And the pay is different too. Interns get paid if they get paid. It varies widely by industry, and you'd find out information on a job description. And then fellowships for PhDs it usually carries a set stipend. So it's not really an hourly wage, but it's going to give you a stipend range. And of course, you can also try to negotiate that with your supervisor. But I hope this gives you a general sense of the differences. And I think once you all have that link and then the database that I send you, you can really filter through different requirements, different disciplines, and we can help you craft a strong application.
Thank you, Sarah. And then I also wanted to highlight some more external resources you can use for finding internships. Actually, LinkedIn Jobs now has a lot of internships, and maybe Sarah can speak to if they have fellowships on there as well, but for sure, internships, there are plenty posted on LinkedIn as well. Extern is something I recommend for students who are looking for remote internships specifically. Um, they are 8 week long summer internships. So all the same things that you would get in an in-person internship, but it is remote. This tends to have more like business, finance, things that are, a little bit require more, work on your laptop than they do in person. And then for those of you interested in consulting, the two resources I like to recommend are Forge and Management Consulted. Forge is not necessarily a tool for researching consulting, or finding consulting internships, but it's kind of like if you're interested in exploring consulting, Forge kind of gives you like a case study you can do that takes about 6 hours. But often students will do this case study and they'll walk away either thinking like, yes, absolutely, consulting's for me, or actually, I didn't like that experience, I'm not going to pursue consulting. So if you're kind of in that exploratory, like you're hearing your friends talk about it, I would suggest doing Forge. You can find that on our website when you search Forge. And then Management Consulted is, again, if you're interested in consulting, it gives you, it actually has a whole free web page you can use for upcoming deadlines for upcoming internships and full-time roles within consulting. It also has like a whole database of like all the different consulting firms from boutique to big four, and you can read more about like the culture of the consulting firms to see if like one of them is the right fit for you. And then if you are interested in nonprofits, specifically for like Los Angeles based nonprofits, I like Do Good LA. They have a lot of nonprofits listed on there where you can then look for internships within their websites. And if you're interested in government work, the websites I recommend are usajobs.gov for federal, and then government jobs for more broadly like local government or state sometimes as well. And if you are an international student, something that will help you with your search are the three following resources. So Interstride is made by international students for international students, and basically on there are companies that have historically offered sponsorship. So it helps in your search by kind of cutting down some of the work and like doing the extra work to see if the company may or may not offer sponsorship, because the ones on there have historically offered. In going global, if you're interested in an internship abroad, that would be a good place to look. And F1 Hire isn't necessarily a search tool. However, it does help in your search. What it does is it's an extension for, I think, Chrome and Safari. And when you are looking at internships, let's say on like LinkedIn Jobs, it has like a pop-up that tells you if this job or company has offered sponsorship. So again, like it cuts back some of the work in knowing if the organization may or may not offer sponsorship. So while some of these tools are for finding internships, some of them will aid in your search as well. And then highlighting more industry-specific job boards. For those of you who are interested in these different industries, like entertainment, education, there's of course more than these, but I did want to highlight a few for you to all have additional resources as you are doing your internship search. So for example, for education, Chronicle or SoCal HERC can definitely help, but there are more if you're interested in higher ed, more if you're interested in K through 12. And then again, for engineering, there are definitely a lot more than these two, but it's about doing your research for which websites to look for your specific industry's job sites as well. And if you're interested in art-related ones or music, I also wanted to highlight Art Search and then Bridge Worldwide Music Connection. And again, there are a lot more than these. I also recommend professional associations. They often have, within their websites, they have job boards. So for example, like Sarah and I, we would be part of like NASPA or NACE. And then within those professional associations, they would have job boards as well. So I also recommend looking at professional associations within your industry as an added tool for your job search. And then for networking strategies, so you've probably heard from maybe your professors or your peers that you should be networking all the time, right, to find an internship, fellowship, or job. While it is very important, if you haven't started, I would recommend for you to get started. And just as a reminder, like making friends is a form of networking. Talking to your peers or talking to your classmates, that is a form of networking. So I'm going to briefly touch on networking strategies, but you can get started with networking simply with talking to your friends, talking to your family, professors. Many of your professors also work in industry, and so they are teaching while also working in the field that they're teaching about, right? So they would still be a really good connection. And even if not, they could probably connect you with one of their peers or coworkers who might be a good connection for you as well. So you can absolutely start with the people you already know. And then if you want to go beyond that, you can reach out to USC alumni through Trojan Network or LinkedIn or CareerShift. We're going to go over briefly kind of how to reach out to people through these websites in just a minute. Okay, so we recommend doing informational interviews. This is kind of used interchangeably with coffee chats sometimes. So you may have heard, have you done coffee chats? Or have you networked with people, right? These words are all kind of used interchangeably, almost just to say like, have you talked to somebody new about their field, right? So these can be virtual, in person, over the phone, these informational interviews or coffee chats. But if you hear this again, informational interviews are a way for you to learn about a person's career path or their organization. It's basically like a reverse interview where instead of you being the one being asked questions, you're the one asking someone else questions about their path or their industry or their career or their company, right? Whatever you have questions about. And it's a little more informal than a traditional interview, right, where you're trying to get a job. Your goal in this is simply to form a connection, like you're planting seeds for more long term outcomes for your career, right? Because you're not just going to walk up to someone and be like, hey, can I have a job? Right? You want to just plant the seed, build the relationship, and over time, they may be someone who can be a referral or who can help you enter the company. But your goal in doing these coffee chats or informational interviews should really just be to get to know the person or their career path. I do recommend doing a few informational interviews or coffee chats, whatever you want to call them, while you're in your program, partially to like understand your own interest as you are exploring maybe which industry you want to get into or what you exactly you want to do with the internship. But it also is just a good way to build connections for getting that internship or getting your foot in the door with a certain company. And as an example for what to write in these like outreach emails or outreach messages, typically I recommend having a introduction to yourself, why you're reaching out, and then a time commitment. So in the message you see here on the right, I wrote an example of what I would write if I was sending something like this to someone on LinkedIn or Trojan Network, for example. So, for example, hi, John, my name is Liz. I am a second year graduate student in the MBA program here at USC. So that's my introduction. I see that you have worked at Amazon for a while, so that's why I'm reaching out. I was wondering if you have 15 minutes to chat on the phone about how you got started there. And that's my time commitment, right? So that's three things, it's 3 sentences, short and sweet. And typically people are more likely to respond if one, you have a connection, so like if you're reaching out to USC alum, that's your connection. And two, if you have a time commitment somewhere in the message. I wrote 15 minutes, right? It's a short time commitment. They're not going out of the way for me, so they're more likely to say yes. Sarah, do you want to get us started on resumes?
Sure. Before I jump into resumes, I just want to quickly touch upon your question about LinkedIn fellowships. So you can go on LinkedIn and go on jobs and search fellowship fellow, fellowship programs, early career programs, or whatnot. Especially utilizing the entry level or associate filter. Sometimes they don't use the word fellowships. There could be like, I mean, you can try looking for like research fellow, policy fellow, administrative fellow. Um, but if you're in higher ed, it's like program coordinator, program assistant, things like that. So I'm going to send you, or we are going to send you an email with some of these links. And so, um, yes, use LinkedIn, but I would highly recommend using the database that we share. I also wanted to quickly touch on informational interviews too. I think Liz brought up a great point. Like networking really is going to take you to the next level and it's really going to open doors for you. It's at the end of the day, it's really who you know. I would recommend being consistent with this process, giving yourself tangible goals. So it can be, I'm going to reach out to 5 people a week and I'm going to try to schedule one coffee chat, right? You're not going to get every person you reach out to say a yes, but you will get a certain percentage. And it's with that certain percentage how you keep in touch, right? Once you get on a call, I know it says 15 minutes here, but typically that 15 minutes turns into 20, it turns into 30 if it's a good conversation, right? And right after the call, right, it's most important to send a thank you letter and then always keep in touch, right? You can send them an email after a couple few weeks or even a few months. Having done what they have, suggested you to do, like taking that action. If they said, "Hey, Sarah, you should maybe complete a certificate," or "Sarah, maybe you should, tweak this on your resume to make yourself a more competitive candidate," actually do what they have suggested, and then follow up with them and say, "Thank you so much. These are the changes that I've made. Just wanted to let you know." And that's a great way. Even if they don't have opportunities right away, they will keep you in mind for sure if you do that on a monthly basis. And kind of like checking your emails, I would create a list for yourself. I like to call that like a personal CRM of some sort. If you go on YouTube, one of my favorite videos is Jeff Sue's personal CRM video. He created like a Notion template in which you can create a list of different people from different companies and keep track of even things like their birthdays, right? And notes. And he set up a system which every 3 months it pings you and says, now it's time to reach out to Sally from Google, right? And so you can do that as a way to keep track of your conversations and relationships as you're checking your emails in the morning, right? Or you can set notifications to earlier than 3 months if you think 3 months is too far out, or or later if you're like, I'm going to just focus on my current contacts and reach out to my new contacts in 6 months. So it's really up to you to decide how you want to go about it. But having a system like that is really going to help you stay organized. Finally, in regards to information interviews, I would highly recommend you check out our AI career series. We will also send you that link, but you can really type AI career series or AI guidelines on Google and it should pop up. We've talked about the differences or talked about the different ways to think about AI, right? You want to understand technology, you want to maintain authenticity, you want to make sure that you are evaluating ethical implications, and then finally seeking professional guidance. But what's really going to be helpful for you is all of our recordings that we have from fall 2024 to even now. When we have a few scheduled for the future, we might have an AI boot camp. So you just be on the lookout for those emails. But we have a job search 2.0 LinkedIn plus ChatGPT video in which we had a great speaker, Jeremy Schiffling, come along and talk exactly about what Liz just mentioned, templates on what you can say on LinkedIn to get recruiters' attention or even attention of alumni from USC. And then there's things like optimizing your resume and cover letter. And finally, one of our most recent webinars was with someone who is a manager under the CEO at Microsoft. And she talked about how resumes is great, but also having a career deck is even greater because you can bring that to your information interviews. It's kind of like a one-pager that showcases who you are. And she tells you how to drop that in a conversation. So it's really interesting and engaging. And that's really how you want to stand out in the job market. You don't want to continue to do what everyone else is doing, but you want to be a little bit different. I know not everyone is prepared to have a portfolio, right? Because you're not an artist of some sort. However, I think something like a career deck will really help you stand out. So make sure to check that out once we send it out. Okay.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to highlight was, I had talked briefly about the Children Network LinkedIn career shift. I think a lot of people are familiar with LinkedIn, but not many with Trojan Network. If you're not on there, I would recommend making a Trojan Network profile. It's basically like LinkedIn, but it's uniquely for USC students and alumni. And so I think about it like these are alumni who went the extra step beyond LinkedIn because they want to give back. And then you can do a lot of filters on Trojan Network for like specifically your major or class year or whatever it is that you're looking for to find alum to connect with. So I just wanted to highlight that since I briefly went over it earlier. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight, kind of just piggybacking off of what Sarah said about being consistent in reaching out. The number one question I also get from students is how many should I reach out to? There's really no like right answer for that. It's really what you're comfortable with, where you're not like stressing about this constantly, but you feel comfortable with the number that you are reaching out to and meeting with. So only you know that number for yourself. And then transitioning over to resumes. Okay, so we've talked about doing your research, reflecting. We've talked about where to find internships, fellowships, and a part of the application process, an important part, is your resume and your cover letter. So we're just going to briefly go over some resume tips we have for you. So typically you want to keep it to one page. And you want to make sure your resume is right for your specific industry. So for example, if you're in engineering, your resume is going to look a lot different than someone who's in maybe marketing, right? So just make sure that your resume is, the right sort of structure for your industry. Sarah will talk briefly about like the skills that you want to highlight on your resume as a grad student. And then again, maybe transitioning if you're going into industry, your CV to a resume. Typically, you keep it at one page depending on how much experience you have. You want to make sure it's organized well. We don't recommend using templates. For example, Canvas templates, Word templates. The reason for that is that most companies use ATS or an AI to like look at your resume first. And it doesn't pick up text boxes very well. And some of those templates also have like pictures or icons, right? And so while they look very pretty, they're not the most professional looking, or they're not being picked up by the AI that these companies are using. Um, if you want some tools you can use, we have VMOC, which is our AI that gives you kind of advice that's on par with what an advisor would say. So it actually scans it, it categorizes it into three different types of feedback, and it gives you like line by line, like it highlights things that you could fix. It also has a template that we have reviewed and is okay for the ATS system. So we do recommend the VMOC template. We also have a guide that we're going to point you to in the next slide, as well as drop-ins if you'd like to come in from 1 to 3:30 Monday through Friday, where we can review your resume as well. And then for your cover letter, again, some quick advice for your cover letter. So some frequent questions that we get is, does it have to be an actual cover letter format with the addresses, right, and all of that? The answer is yes. You still want to have a formal cover letter. Keep it to one page. We do have some recommended points for what to have in your cover letter. You don't just want to reiterate what's on your resume. I think that's the most common mistake we see is it's basically just almost line for line your resume, but in a cover letter format. What I like to recommend is think about something that's not on your resume that you can speak more at length about in your cover letter, or something that's maybe one line in your resume, but you can really talk about it more at length in your cover letter through a whole paragraph rather than just a line that expands more on how that experience applies to the job that internship you're applying for. You also want to point to specifically how that skill set applies to the job or internship description. So this would be a form of more technical writing where you're drawing a line specifically to how your skill set applies to that job or internship description. You also want to have a references page ready. This is not something that you necessarily turn into them. However, they always ask for references. So typically you want to have their name, their current title, their email, their phone number. You also want to make sure they know that they are your reference. So if it's someone that maybe you worked with like several years ago and you're putting as a reference, they are going to call this person. So you just want to make sure that they are aware and they don't like pick up the phone for, this reference call and they're like, who are you talking about? I haven't talked to this person in several years. So just make sure that they are up to date, that they are your reference, and you have this information about them. Sarah, do you want to touch on anything before we move on to the skills?
Just wanted to clarify that for those of you who are doctoral students in the Zoom room here today, if you are applying for an industry role, you want to submit a resume. And I will also send you a link with my presentation on CVs versus resumes in case you're interested in taking a deeper dive. But yeah, so everything Liz mentioned right now is so relevant. Another way that I would like to think about cover letters is like it's a persuasive essay. That's like a different perspective that I like to give to students. Yes, you're telling your story, but you're really trying to persuade the employer that you're a good fit. So in your introduction, your final sentence of course, in your introduction, you're kind of, like Liz mentioned, like you're breaking down for the employer what role you're applying for um, and a quick hook to get the reader interested in the rest of your cover letter. But the final sentence should really be like a thesis statement in which it shapes your body paragraphs, maybe three specific skills that you want to highlight or three specific experiences. And then your body paragraphs should go off those top three things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way to think about it. And then what I always tell students to do is tie it back to the role, right? Don't just say, here's my experience and reiterate your resume, but help them picture you in the role. So you can talk about an experience and then say, therefore, in this role, right? Of course, you don't want to continue to use therefore, but for the example today, right? After you talk about your experiences, let's say you're talking about communication, right? It's like, therefore, in this role, I see myself communicating it with the managers in this way, right? You want to continue to do that for all of your body paragraphs. And then, like Liz mentioned, the conclusion is just wrapping things up. Um, and what I also see happening a lot with students is, especially when they're applying for internships, right? They're focusing a lot on what they hope to gain from the internship, which I think is amazing, right? You've done your research, and I'm sure getting into this internship for a reason because you want to learn and grow as a professional, but it's important to frame the cover letter as what you want to contribute. Because from an employer standpoint, they're trying to see how you fit well with the team, right? And they are also very much interested in your contributions as an intern coming in, right? Even if you feel like you don't have all the skill sets readily available, they want your strengths to play out, and they want to hear your ideas and your thoughts. So please frame your cover letters in that way. And if you have any additional questions, we're happy to help you through it. I answered questions in the chat. For those of you who are at HSC, if you're unable to come to the UPC campus, I'm happy to meet with students virtually. So please make an appointment on Handshake and I'll go over your resume and cover letter. But for those of you who are on the UPC campus, like Liz mentioned, please stop by during our drop-in hours. And then one additional note, on Fridays, we have LinkedIn review from 1 to 3:30 as well. Skills graduate students have. So there's a ton of transferable skills that you can reference on your resume. The best thing that you can do is to take the job description, highlight key phrases and terms, and then translate that over directly to your application materials. But this is just one of the things, like a general list of skills that most employers are looking for. They want someone who is able to learn and adapt really quickly, thrive in competitive environments, work independently, but also on a team in a very self-directed manner. So being proactive. You want to showcase that you are able to have focus, tenacity, discipline, and lead group projects, perform under pressure, reach and defend independent conclusions. Right at all levels, this is something that PhD students are great at. Brief abstract, lengthy manuscripts, class papers, grants, dissertations, convey complex information to expert and non-expert audiences. This is also a good one, right? Sometimes you're presenting a research paper to your faculty members, right? Or you are presenting research to industry professionals. Sometimes you are presenting it and you really need to, use common words for it. So, and summarize it really quickly, right? So you want to be able to showcase that you're able to do both. And then you, as students, graduate students and PhD students, you're great at resolving conflict, right? You've worked with a ton of different people and you know how to do that. So, and that's really a common question that comes up during interviews too, right? Tell me about a time when you had a difficult coworker or a difficult team member, how to resolve it, or tell me about a time when, a project didn't go your way. How did you resolve that, right? So it's important to highlight these skills on your resume and cover letter, and also as you are thinking through your application materials, it's going to help you prepare for your interviews down the line.
Thanks, Sarah. And this is what I highlighted earlier. This is our guidebook for effective resumes, CVs, and cover letters, as well as a LinkedIn profiles guide. You can go ahead and scan the QR, but this is also something you can find on Handshake as well as on our website if you don't find this on your phone. It also has examples based on industry. So, for example, the distinction between like an engineering resume versus a business one. You can also see if you are interested in applying for more academic things, how to do a CV. And then we have a cover letter guide that I like a lot because it also has a job description, and so you're seeing like how they wrote the cover letter based on that job description, and like Sarah described earlier, how they're drawing that direct connection to the job description in their cover letter. And then we also have some quick tips on LinkedIn profiles as well. And then for preparing for the interview, again, just quick tips from both of us. You want to research the company and industry before the interview. This is where that job description really comes in handy. You can use that job description to form questions that they may ask you in the job interview. You could also use ChatGPT to help you prepare. So you could copy and paste the job description into ChatGPT and ask it to give you, let's say, like 10 to 15 questions based on that job description. And it'll give you some pretty good example interview questions. And then for tools for preparation, we also want to highlight the Big Interview that you can use to practice online. It records like a mock interview for you with like an AI person. It does feel kind of real, and you can also base the interview based on your industry. So if you're like in business or communications, you can pick whichever one is most aligned with the kind of interview you're going to be doing. You can also make a mock interview appointment with one of us. It helps us to have the job description So if you could make the appointment at least 3 days in advance, and then also provide the link to the job description or copy and paste it in the description for us to prepare for this mock interview. That helps us a lot to make it feel a little bit more realistic. And then also sending a thank you note. This is another question that I get pretty often is, should you send a thank you note? The answer is yes. It never hurts to send a thank you note after an interview. You're acknowledging their time for interviewing you. It also reminds them of you after the interview, and it's always appreciated. This is also an opportunity where, let's say you don't feel like you did great on one of the questions, you could probably answer it then in your thank you note, or acknowledge it in your thank you note where you do provide an answer for it. And then I also want to give Sarah an opportunity if you have anything to add for like interview tips for them as well.
Well, I think Liz, you covered most of it. Interviews, it just takes practice, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, please just come in for a mock interview appointment. Let's see. Um, yeah, I mean, just it, and then depending on like where you are with your interview, right? You might be in your first round, your second round, third round. It's going to look a little different. Sometimes they're going to ask the same questions. Other times, it's going to look different based on who is in the interview room. So you can always ask like, who am I being interviewed by, to have that information at hand, and then you can come in and we can discuss it together. Um, but it's how you communicate is everything. So even if you have a strong application, if you're not able to articulate it in a way where an audience is understanding your skill sets and your experiences, you might not get the position. And so I think after you master your resume and have, a pretty confident idea of how to craft a cover letter, much of your time should be focused on preparing for an interview. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually make it through all the rounds.
Thanks, Sarah. Alrighty, as we kind of wrap up our workshop, these are some final kind of tips for your internship offer. So these are some things you want to make sure you look for when you do get that offer. You want to make sure you have all of this in writing, not something like just discussed over the phone, but actually have it written somewhere in an email. You want to know the exact name of the company and the specific department that you're going to be working for, your exact title, who your supervisor is going to be, your internship start and stop dates. So let's say that maybe it conflicts with your class schedule. Maybe you want to make sure you know when that starts and stops. Your work schedule, how many hours you're going to be working. Is it part-time, full-time? Again, have this all in writing. If you're going to be paid, how much and how often. Again, you want to make sure you get this in writing. And some internships will have like NDAs you have to sign, confidentiality. So if you have anything like that, just make sure you know what they are. And make sure you have all of this in writing. If not, then speak to the HR department to make sure you do get this information before you sign on to anything. And then lastly, we wanted to touch on like self-care tips. I know it can be maybe overwhelming as you're searching for internships or fellowships while you are in school. So it's an added task, and it can feel a little bit defeating if maybe you're not getting any calls back, or maybe your peers are finding internships but not yourself. But just remember, it's not a linear path. So don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself grace as you navigate this. Manage your time well. And again, it's what's right for you, right? So if you're feeling like overwhelmed with trying to apply for 5 internships daily, then kind of set a more realistic goal for yourself for what fits within your schedule. Make sure you're getting rest and downtime, again, for your well-being and your mental health. Ask for help from not just us, but your peers and your faculty. A lot of people are here to help you. And make sure you're celebrating the small wins. So turning in an application is a win, getting an interview is a win. So just be proud of yourself for all of these wins. And then I also just wanted to highlight the counseling and mental health services link here if you did want to talk to someone. And then as we kind of come to a close, these are just a few of the upcoming events we have. You can see all of them when you scan the QR code or visit the link on Handshake. Sarah also highlighted some earlier. Sarah, I just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to highlight any grad student specific ones that are not here.
Yeah, so we have something called a Doctoral Career Leadership Network. Again, for PhD students in this room, we have roughly two events every month of the semester. One to create the doctoral community and make sure that you're not only just in your labs, but you are getting to know different peers from different disciplines and really networking. But two, to expose you to different career paths and also get you in front of employers and alumni. So we have one event coming up on January 29th from 6 to 7:30 at MCB 101. I will send you that information. We're going to have a great mentoring and career program. Different representatives coming. They're from SMDP. I wish I can drop that in the chat. But it's like a biotech program, and you receive a lot of mentorship. And they really help you with your research. And they have like 5-day training sessions to talk about career opportunities within industry. You also get coaching opportunities, or they coach you on your career. And they also have a major industry conference. And so lots of great stuff happening. I would come and check them out. This also applies to undergraduates. I know you're not here as undergraduates, but all levels can apply, but specifically for STEM. And then we also have an event coming up January 30th, which is this Friday. And this is for those of you who want to go into consulting, entrepreneurship, or business. So we have panelists for all three categories. Do want to highlight that we have someone from BCG coming. So if you're specifically interested in becoming a consultant at BCG, this is a great opportunity. And after a set of panel questions, we're going to have a networking hour in which you can get dinner and then talk to everybody. So highly would recommend it. It should be on your newsletters if you haven't checked it yet, but we'll also send it out. And you don't have to be in that industry to come out. Like I mentioned, it's for you to explore different industries too. So don't be scared. You don't need any experience. Please just come and attend and hear out the panelists.
Thanks, Sarah. And just some final things before I close this out. If you did have any more questions, this is our general email. Drop-in advising is Monday through Friday, 1 to 3:30 p.m. Again, to have your resume or cover letter reviewed. And then if you did want to keep in touch with one of us, these are our emails. I also recommend following us on social media. We're actually kind of funny sometimes. And then we also have a lot of our upcoming events highlighted on social media, specifically on Instagram. And then all the recordings that Sarah talked about earlier, they're on our YouTube channel, as well as this one that will be on our YouTube channel in about a week. But that's it. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week, and please join us for other events at CareerFest.
Thank you
Bye.
all.